Loyalty has a price tag, and my family's was my multi-million-dollar inheritance. After my grandfather passed away, my golden child sister didn't merely pocket the fortune meant for me. She successfully spun a narrative to our parents that I was a greedy, delusional liar. However, her flawless plan missed one crucial detail. Dead men might not tell tales, but they certainly leave a paper trail. If you looked up golden child in the dictionary, you'd find a picture of my older sister, Samantha. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Seattle, Washington, Samantha was the sun, and the rest of our family merely existed in her orbit. She was a former pageant queen, perpetually draped in designer clothes she couldn't afford, with a smile that could charm the wallet out of a stranger's pocket. Our parents, Alexander and Helen Schuyler, worshipped the ground she walked in her red-soled Louboutins. To them, Samantha could do no wrong. Then there was me, Chloe. I was the practical one, the one who wore hand-me-downs without complaining, the one who actually finished my accounting degree at the University of Washington, while Samantha dropped out to find herself in Europe. My parents tolerated me, but their pride and joy was strictly reserved for my sister. However, there was one person in our family who saw right through Samantha's glittering facade. Our grandfather, Alexander Schuyler Sr. Grandpa Art was a self-made man. He had built a highly successful lumber and commercial real estate business from the ground up in the 1970s. He was a man of calloused hands, sharp wits, and zero tolerance for nonsense. He loved us both, but he never bought into Samantha's manipulative tears or her grandiose business pitches. "She's a shark, Chloe," he used to tell me, sitting on the porch of his sprawling Mercer Island estate, sipping his black coffee. "A shark wrapped in silk. Don't ever let her back you into a corner." I was closest to Grandpa. I spent my weekends helping him audit his old ledgers, listening to his stories about the early days of Seattle, and simply being present. Samantha only ever showed up when she needed seed money for her latest doomed venture: a luxury dog spa, a boutique fitness app, an organic candle company. Every time, Grandpa would give her a stern lecture and a fraction of what she asked for, which she would promptly blow on vacations. The dynamic shattered when Grandpa was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim, and the decline was rapid. For 4 agonizing months, I practically lived at Virginia Mason Hospital. I was the one holding the basin when the chemo made him sick. I was the one managing his pain medication schedules, fighting with the nurses to make sure he was comfortable, and sleeping on that dreadful, stiff vinyl chair in the corner of his room. Where was Samantha? She was in Milan. She claimed she had crucial networking events for her failing high-end fashion boutique, Samantha's Threads. Our parents vehemently defended her absence. "She can't handle hospitals, Chloe." My mother, Helen, scolded me over the phone while I was wiping sweat from Grandpa's brow. "Samantha is highly sensitive. Her empathic nature makes it too traumatic for her to see your grandfather like this. Stop being so judgmental and just do your part." Her part. I was doing both our parts, but I didn't care. I wanted to be there for the man who had been my true anchor. In his final week, Grandpa Art was mostly incoherent, floating on a heavy cloud of morphine. But there was one afternoon where the fog lifted. He gripped my hand with a surprising, desperate strength. His skin was paper-thin, his eyes clouded, but his voice was completely steady. "Chloe," he rasped, his eyes locking onto mine. "I fixed it. Albright has the papers, the house, the trust. It's yours. Don't let them take it. She'll try. Promise me you'll fight." "Shh, Grandpa, don't worry about that now," I whispered, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Just rest." "Promise me," he demanded, his grip tightening until it hurt. "I promise," I choked out. He relaxed back into the pillows, closing his eyes. 2 days later, Alexander Schuyler Sr. passed away quietly in his sleep. I was holding his hand. The moment the news of his death broke, Samantha miraculously overcame her empathic trauma and flew back from Italy. At the funeral, she put on an Oscar-worthy performance. Dressed in a sleek, custom black Dior dress and an oversized veil, she threw herself over his mahogany casket, sobbing hysterically. She leaned heavily on our father, wailing about how she had lost her soulmate and her biggest supporter. I stood a few feet away, numb and exhausted, wearing a simple black dress I bought off the rack at Macy's. I watched my parents fawn over her, rubbing her back, whispering comforting words, completely ignoring the daughter who had actually spent the last 4 months bathing their dying father. As I watched Samantha dab perfectly dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Grandpa's final words echoed in my head. "She'll try." I didn't know what she was going to try, but I knew the nightmare was just beginning. 3 days after we buried Grandpa Art, our family gathered at the sleek downtown Seattle offices of Albright and Associates. Thomas Albright, an older, distinguished attorney who had handled my grandfather's affairs for 30 years, sat at the head of the conference table. He looked somber as he adjusted his glasses. My parents sat on one side of the table, Samantha sandwiched between them, dabbing her nose with a tissue. I sat opposite them, my hands folded in my lap. "Alexander was a great man," Mr. Albright began, opening a thick leather folder. "As his executor, I am here to execute the terms of his last will and testament, drafted and finalized 5 years ago. He was very specific about his wishes." "Actually, Mr. Albright," Samantha interrupted. Her voice wasn't shaky or tearful anymore. It was sharp, confident. She reached into a Prada tote bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "Grandpa and I had a long, tearful conversation right before I had to leave for Europe. He was so worried about my business, and he realized his old will didn't reflect his current feelings. We had a new will drawn up, an amended one." Mr. Albright froze, his bushy eyebrows shooting up to his hairline. "A new will?" "Samantha, I was Alexander's sole attorney. I haven't drafted any new documents." "He didn't want to bother you," Samantha said smoothly, sliding a thick stack of papers across the polished wood table. "He had a notary come to the house, along with an independent lawyer, a Mr. Richard Belmont. It supersedes your document." The room went dead silent. Mr. Albright picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the first page, then the signature page. I watched his face drain of color. I will need to verify the authenticity of this, of course," Mr. Albright stammered, looking completely thrown. "But on its face, it has a notary seal. It's dated October 12th. October 12th, I did the math in my head. That was exactly 3 weeks before Grandpa died. That was the week he had been admitted to the ICU for a severe infection. He was delirious and hallucinating. "Read it, Tom," my father urged, leaning forward, eager to see what his golden child had secured. Mr. Albright cleared his throat, his eyes darting to me with a look of profound pity. "According to this document, the entirety of Alexander Schuyler's estate, including the Mercer Island property, the liquid assets, and the controlling shares of Schuyler Real Estate, are left to a newly formed trust of which Samantha Schuyler is the sole beneficiary and trustee." The air was sucked out of my lungs. "What?" I whispered. "Furthermore," Mr. Albright continued, his voice tight, "a stipend of $5,000 a month is allocated to Alexander and Helen Schuyler, and to his granddaughter, Chloe Schuyler, a one-time lump sum of $15,000. $15,000, out of an estate worth roughly $5 million. "This is a forgery," I said, standing up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is an absolute lie. Grandpa couldn't even hold a pen on October 12th. He was on an IV drip of Dilaudid." "Chloe, sit down!" my father snapped, his face flushing dark red. "Do not disrespect your sister or your grandfather's final wishes." "His final wishes?" I screamed, the grief and exhaustion of the last 4 months finally exploding. "I was there. Where were you, Dad? You visited twice. And you?" I turned my blazing eyes to Samantha, who was looking at me with an expression of calm, manufactured pity. "You were in Italy. You didn't speak to him. You forged this." "Chloe, please," Samantha sighed, looking at our parents as if she were dealing with a rabid dog. "I know you're hurting. We're all grieving. But Grandpa knew I had the business acumen to handle his legacy. He knew you'd just blow it, or worse, let it rot in a bank. He told me he wanted to make sure his favorite girl was taken care of." "You sociopath," I hissed. "That is enough," my mother shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. "Chloe, you have been nothing but bitter and jealous of Samantha your entire life. Your grandfather saw how resentful you were. It's no wonder he didn't trust you with his legacy. You're acting like a greedy, toxic child. Apologize to your sister right now." I stared at my mother, then my father. They stood united behind Samantha, glaring at me with genuine disgust. My own parents, they were perfectly happy to watch Samantha steal everything, perfectly happy to dismiss my months of agonizing caregiving, all to maintain their delusion that Samantha was a saint. "Mr. Albright," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm, "are you going to let her do this?" "Chloe," the lawyer said gently, looking devastated, "if this document is legally sound, and the notary seal is valid, my hands are tied. You would have to contest it in probate court, and without hard proof of fraud or coercion, that is a very difficult, very expensive battle." Samantha smirked. It was a tiny, microscopic curling of her lips, but I saw it. She knew I only had my meager savings from my junior accounting job. I couldn't afford a massive legal war. She had boxed me in. "I have nothing to say to any of you," I whispered, grabbing my coat. As I walked out, I heard my father apologize to Samantha for my embarrassing outburst. The next week was a blur of trauma. Samantha wasted no time. Because she was now the executor and sole owner of the estate, she legally evicted me from the small guest cottage on the Mercer Island property where I had lived while caring for Grandpa. She sent 2 burly movers who boxed up my life in under 3 hours, dumping my boxes on the curb. My parents officially cut me off. They sent me a long, scathing text message stating that until I sought psychiatric help for my jealousy and apologized to Samantha, I was no longer welcome in their home. I moved into a cramped, dark studio apartment in a sketchy part of Tacoma. I spent the first few nights sleeping on a mattress on the floor, crying until I vomited, mourning the loss of my grandfather and the family I thought I had. Samantha had won. She took my inheritance, she took my home, and she took my parents. But Samantha made one fatal mistake. She assumed I was weak. About a month into my exile, I was unpacking the last of my boxes. I pulled out a heavy, intricately carved wooden music box. Grandpa Art had given it to me for my 16th birthday. It played Clair de Lune. As I set it on the rickety windowsill, it slipped from my tired hands and crashed onto the hardwood floor. I gasped and dropped to my knees, frantically trying to piece the shattered mahogany back together. As I pulled the broken bottom panel away, something shiny caught my eye. Hidden in a hollowed-out compartment beneath the velvet lining was a small brass key. Attached to it was a stiff paper tag with a logo, Washington Federal Bank. Stamped on the metal was the number 402. I sat back on my heels, my heart hammering against my ribs. Grandpa hadn't been delusional that day in the hospital. I fixed it. Albright has the papers. Albright didn't have the papers. Grandpa must have known Albright's office could be compromised, or he knew Samantha would try something underhanded. He hid his real failsafe. I clutched the brass key so tightly it dug into my palm. My tears stopped. The crushing grief was suddenly replaced by an icy, razor-sharp fury. Samantha thought she had buried me. She didn't realize I was a seed, and it was time to grow some thorns. The next morning, the Seattle rain was coming down in sheets, matching my mood as I stood outside the downtown branch of Washington Federal Bank. My clothes were damp, my bank account was overdrawn by $12, but my grip on the small brass key was ironclad. I asked to speak to the branch manager, a kind-eyed man named David Chen. When I produced my ID and the key, his face softened with recognition. "Ah, Miss Schuyler, your grandfather told me you might be coming, though he said it might take you a little while to find the key." He led me down into the basement, the air growing cool and sterile until we reached the massive steel doors of the safe deposit vault. He unlocked his side of box 402, and I turned my brass key in the other slot. He left me alone in a small, private viewing room with a long metal box. My hands shook as I popped the lid. Inside, there was a thick, sealed manila envelope, a black leather-bound journal, and a small, silver USB flash drive. I grabbed my laptop from my backpack, plugged in the drive, and clicked on the single video file stored there. The screen flickered, and suddenly there was Grandpa Art. He was sitting in his leather armchair in the Mercer Island study. He looked slightly thinner, but sharp, alert, and very much alive. The timestamp in the corner read October 28th, 6 days after the date on Samantha's forged will, and just days before he slipped into his final decline. "Hello, Chloe." His gruff voice filled the tiny room. Tears instantly blurred my vision. "If you're watching this, it means the worst has happened. Not just my passing, but that your sister actually went through with it." Grandpa looked straight into the camera, his eyes blazing with a familiar, terrifying intensity. "Samantha thinks I'm a senile old fool. A few months ago, I caught her snooping through my desk. I set a trap. I hired a private investigator, a man named Robert Shaw. Shaw discovered that Samantha had been meeting with a disbarred attorney named Richard Belmont and a disgraced notary to draft a fraudulent will. They planned to wait until I was incapacitated to date and execute it. I gasped, pressing my hand over my mouth. Instead of confronting her, I let her think she was getting away with it, Grandpa continued, a grim smile playing on his lips. I wanted to see how far she would go, and more importantly, I needed an airtight way to protect you. In the envelope in this box, you will find my actual final, last will and testament, drafted on October 25th by Victoria Hastings at Hastings and Croft. It revokes all previous wills. It was witnessed by my chief oncologist at Virginia Mason and a sitting Superior Court judge, old friends of mine who can testify to my absolute mental clarity. He leaned forward. "Samantha is a shark, Chloe, but she forgot who taught her how to swim. Take this to Victoria. Bury them." I spent the next hour reading through the documents. Grandpa hadn't just left me the entire estate. He had compiled a dossier. The leather journal contained bank records showing Samantha siphoning money from his accounts years ago, plus the POI's photographs of Samantha handing cash to Richard Belmont in a parking garage. I didn't go back to my dingy apartment. I walked straight down 4th Avenue to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Hastings and Croft. Victoria Hastings was a legend in Seattle corporate law, a tall, imposing woman with silver hair cut into a sharp bob and a stare that could cut glass. When I finally got past her receptionist and laid the contents of Box 402 on her mahogany desk, she watched the video in complete silence. When it ended, she slowly closed the laptop. A predatory smile spread across her face. "Your grandfather was a brilliant, ruthless man," Victoria said softly. "I told him this trap was legally risky, but he insisted. He said he needed to prove to your parents exactly who their golden child was." She looked up at me. "Are you ready for a war, Chloe?" "I don't want a war," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I want an execution." For the next 3 months, we played dead. Victoria advised me not to breathe a word to my family. We let Samantha file her forged will in King County Probate Court. We let her take the oath as executor. We watched from the shadows as she immediately began liquidating Grandpa's assets. She bought herself a $200,000 Mercedes G-Wagon. She threw a lavish mourning party on a rented yacht. My parents were equally complicit. My mother posted endless photos on Facebook of her and Samantha shopping in Paris, funded by the estate, with captions like, "So blessed to have a daughter who honors her grandfather's legacy." Meanwhile, I was working double shifts at a local diner to pay for groceries, waiting for the trap to spring. Victoria filed a quiet objection to the probate closure, requesting a formal evidentiary hearing. Samantha's lawyer, Belmont, arrogance blinding him, didn't even bother to properly prepare, assuming I was just a broke, desperate sister throwing a tantrum. He had no idea what was coming. The King County Superior Courthouse is a beautiful, imposing building. On the morning of the hearing, I walked through the heavy oak doors wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, bought with a small loan Victoria had graciously advanced me. When I entered courtroom 4B, my family was already there. Samantha looked like a movie star in a white Chanel suit, her hair perfectly blown out. My parents sat behind her in the gallery. When they saw me, my father rolled his eyes, and my mother dramatically turned her head away. Samantha leaned over to her lawyer, Richard Belmont, and whispered something, stifling a laugh. "All rise," the bailiff called out, as Judge Kenneth O'Malley, a no-nonsense veteran of the bench, took his seat. "We are here for the contested probate of the estate of Alexander Schuyler Sr., Judge O'Malley stated, looking over his glasses. "Mr. Belmont, you are petitioning to formally close probate and distribute the remaining assets to your client, Ms. Samantha Schuyler." "Yes, Your Honor," Belmont said smoothly, standing up. "My client has dutifully managed the estate. Her sister, the contestant, has no legal standing and is merely engaging in a frivolous, emotionally driven delay tactic." Judge O'Malley turned to my table. "Ms. Hastings, I see you've taken this case. What exactly is your client's objection?" Victoria stood up, adjusting her suit jacket. "Our objection, Your Honor, is that the will Mr. Belmont submitted is a fraudulent document, forged by his client and notarized by a conspirator, while Alexander Schuyler was in a medically induced coma." The courtroom erupted. My mother gasped loudly. Samantha shot up from her chair. "That is an outrageous lie. She's delusional. Order!" Judge O'Malley slammed his gavel. "Ms. Hastings, those are severe allegations. You better have the evidence to back them up." "I have more than evidence, Your Honor," Victoria said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "I have the deceased himself." Victoria handed a flash drive to the bailiff, who plugged it into the court's AV system. 2 large monitors flickered to life. Samantha's smug expression faltered. My parents leaned forward, looking confused. The video of Grandpa Art began to play. His voice, strong and unyielding, filled the courtroom. When he reached the part where he named Richard Belmont and the disgraced notary, the color completely drained from Samantha's face. She looked like she was going to be sick. Belmont was gripping the edge of his table so hard his knuckles were white. "Objection!" he squeaked out. "Deepfake! This is AI generated." "Your Honor," Victoria countered smoothly, handing a massive binder to the bailiff. "Exhibit A. The actual final last will and testament, dated October 25th. Exhibit B. Affidavits from Dr. Harrison Miller, Chief of Oncology, and the Honorable Judge William Barrett, who both witnessed Alexander sign this document and will testify to its authenticity. Exhibit C. Medical records proving Alexander Schuyler was incapable of holding a pen on October 12th, the date of the forged document." Victoria didn't stop there. She turned slightly to look dead at Samantha. "And Exhibit D. Bank records and sworn testimony from the private investigator who photographed Ms. Schuyler paying Mr. Belmont $10,000 in cash on October 10th to secure the fraudulent notary." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. It was the sound of a carefully constructed lie imploding. I looked at my parents. My father was clutching his chest, staring at the screens in pure shock. My mother had her hands over her mouth, her eyes darting between the video of Grandpa and Samantha, who was now trembling violently. "Mr. Belmont," Judge O'Malley said, his voice dangerously low, "do you have anything to say before I have the bailiff take you into custody?" Belmont didn't hesitate. Like a true rat on a sinking ship, he threw Samantha overboard. "Your Honor, I was misled. My client assured me the document was legitimate. She organized the notary." "You cowardly liar!" Samantha shrieked, losing all composure. She lunged at Belmont, her Chanel suit tearing as the bailiff grabbed her by the arms, restraining her. "That is enough," Judge O'Malley roared. He looked down from the bench with absolute disgust. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a brazen, despicable act of elder abuse and fraud. I am dismissing the forged will immediately and admitting the October 25th document to probate. Furthermore, I am referring Ms. Schuyler and Mr. Belmont to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Prosecution on charges of felony forgery, perjury, and fraud." As the bailiffs clamped handcuffs on Samantha's wrists, she looked back at our parents, sobbing, the ugly, raw truth finally exposed on her face. "Mom, Dad, do something, help me." But my parents couldn't do anything. They were paralyzed. As the court adjourned, I walked out into the marble hallway. I felt 1,000 pounds lighter. The air tasted sweeter. Just as I reached the elevators, I heard footsteps behind me. Chloe, wait." It was my mother and father. They looked 10 years older than they had an hour ago. My mother was weeping openly, reaching a hand out toward me. "Chloe, honey, please," my mother choked out. "We didn't know. We swear to you, we didn't know she was capable of this. Your grandfather, he knew we couldn't see it. Please, you have to forgive us." My father nodded, tears standing in his eyes. "We were wrong, Chloe. We are so sorry. Let's go home. We can fix this as a family." I stopped and turned to face them. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt profound emptiness. "When Grandpa was dying, you told me I was judgmental for wanting my sister there," I said softly, my voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "When she stole my inheritance, you called me a toxic, greedy child. You cut me off. You let me sleep on a mattress on the floor in Tacoma, while you went to Paris on the money she stole from me. We were manipulated, my mother pleaded. No, I corrected her. You were willing participants. You chose your reality because it was easier to believe she was perfect than to admit you raised a monster. I pressed the elevator button. The doors slid open. My family is gone, I said, stepping inside. Do not contact me again. As the doors closed, the last thing I saw was my parents collapsing against each other, the weight of their own choices finally crushing them. Karma, it turned out, didn't just come for Samantha. It came for all of them. Over the next year, Samantha's life was reduced to ashes. The district attorney didn't hold back. She was convicted of multiple counts of wire fraud, forgery, and perjury, and sentenced to 5 years in a state correctional facility. Her luxury boutique was seized and liquidated to pay back the estate for the money she had squandered. The financial fallout completely destroyed my parents. Because they had co-signed several loans for Samantha's failing businesses over the years, and because they had blown through their own savings to hire a criminal defense attorney for her, they went bankrupt. They lost the house in the suburbs. They lost their country club memberships. Last I heard, they were renting a small, one-bedroom apartment in a dreary part of Bellevue, living off Social Security. As for me, I moved back into Grandpa's Mercer Island house. I took over his commercial real estate business, using my accounting degree to clean up the ledgers and expand the company. But more importantly, I took a portion of the inheritance and set up the Alexander Schuyler Senior Foundation, a scholarship fund for students pursuing degrees in geriatric care and nursing. Grandpa Art was right. Samantha was a shark. But she made the fatal mistake of dragging me into the deep water, not realizing I knew exactly how to drown her. If my story proves anything, it's that the truth always comes to light, and karma never loses an address. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes blood is just the people willing to bleed you dry. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama.